Greetings from First United Methodist Church of Los Alamos, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. We have now resumed in-person worship with one service at 10 a.m., which is live streamed both on Facebook and on YouTube. We alternate each week between contemporary and traditional music. You may confirm worship times and receive more information by visiting our website, firstinyourheart.org. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our second reading comes from Paul's letter to the Romans. Paul writes, "So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, 'Abba, Father,' it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, and hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay, and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. So today, in addition to being Maundy Thursday, is also opening day for Major League Baseball. Normally, I take this day off in order to watch baseball, which I obviously could not do today. We also normally go to opening day for the Albuquerque Isotopes, but that is tomorrow, and so I won't be there for that game either. I know your hearts are crying out for me. I've always thought that opening day should be a national holiday for many reasons besides just my fandom. And one of those reasons is that it sort of represents the unofficial beginning of spring. One of the reasons why it sort of represents that is, the preparation for opening day is called spring training. We're training for spring to come. Now, it doesn't mean that spring will necessarily be here for those first games, just as a few weeks have shown us with winter storms each weekend that we might be done with winter, but winter is not done with us. And there are plenty of opening days that take place in the midst of snowstorms. I even remember one Easter, when I was in college. I got up and to prepare to go to worship for Easter morning, and I looked out the window to blizzard-like conditions, and so I went back to bed. And that was in Minnesota, so not totally unexpected. And yet we know that spring is right around the corner, that the promise of spring is here. And so it is with opening day, because it is the day in which hope springs eternal. Because as we started this day, every team was tied for first place. No one had a winning record, or no one, more importantly, had a losing record yet. Every fan and every team could say, "This is our year," even if they knew that was ultimately not true. For many fans, they know that their seasons will end more in ignominy than in victory. But regardless, hope springs eternal on this day. And the promise of spring springs eternal as well. New life, new possibilities, new realities, not being cooped up in the house anymore, being able to open up your windows and air it out, being able to take those long hikes into the mountains without freezing to death. In other words, enjoying the spectacular area in which we live. And I can say all of that, even admitting that winter is actually my favorite season. But even with that, the change to spring is still lovely and a wonderful surprise and time. And yet maybe that mention of hope springing eternal in spring itself doesn't really match the reality of why we gather for this worship service on this night. When we began our Lenten journey this year, Ash Wednesday was on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And I said at the time it didn't really seem like Lent and Valentine's Day go together, because one is about love and its reds and its pinks, and the other season is about repentance and its purples and blacks. They seem diametrically opposed, and yet as it turns out, they aren't, because as we journey through this Lenten season, it's because of God's love for us that we even gather here. And the Greek word that gets translated in John's famous passage, the God so loved the world, the Greek word is actually cosmos. You can guess the English word that we get there. And so perhaps it might be better translated as God so loved the creation that God sent God's Son. And so, as it turns out, Lent and love go hand in hand, which sort of matches up with what ends Lent is the celebration of Easter, a victory of love and life over hate and death. And so perhaps hope also needs to be included on this night. We also need hope to be springing eternal for us as we wash feet and we gather at Christ's table. That even though it may be raining, that we know that there are rainbows above us. And yet I strongly suspect that the disciples actually weren't holding out hope in the midst of this night. I can imagine that some of them suspected that what Jesus had said was going to happen, including his betrayal and his arrest and his crucifixion, wasn't actually going to happen, or at least they were hoping it wouldn't be true, which is a different type of hope. But especially after his arrest, and then the next day when he is crucified and dies, their hope had to have been shattered. Everything they believed and hoped that Christ was going to be lay in tatters. They certainly didn't see their suffering and grief as something that would lead to glory, even though that's what Jesus told them exactly what would happen. But the truth is, when you read the gospel, we can see that they didn't believe it. We might not see it because we know how the story ends. We know about the resurrection. We know about new life. But that wasn't yet for the disciples to understand. And so I have to imagine that their hope was destroyed in the events of this night. And it wasn't just the hope that they might see, it was especially the hope that they could not yet see. Just as it is said of shoeless Joe Jackson that his glove is where triples went to die, to return back to my baseball metaphor, the disciples' hope died on this night. And yet perhaps they should have had hope springing eternal, even on this darkest night of their lives, because of what happens on this night. In John's gospel, as we just heard, Jesus washes the disciples' feet, an act not found in the other gospels, the synoptic gospels. And I should also note that John has the last night happening a day before the synoptic gospels do. But Jesus takes this role of servant not just any servant, but the lowliest of servants, and serves the disciples. And then we will hear the accounts of the institution of communion in the Synoptic Gospels, an act, again, that happens earlier in John's Gospel. And once again, Jesus serves all of them. He calls out that one will betray and that one will deny, and he realizes that all of them will flee into the darkness of the night. But there he is with them at the table. And I have to say that this is one of the times I can easily say that Jesus is a much better person than I am. Because if I were surrounded by the disciples and I knew what was about to happen, I might be a little less generous than Jesus was. And so perhaps that's the reason that every single Maundy Thursday, I point out, and will probably continue to do for every other Maundy Thursday that I serve, what happens at that table, because it so amazes me. Because what happens when he gathers with them and offers them the bread and the cup is an example of the love that he has for them in that moment of hope that he is giving to them at the table, even if they didn't realize what that hope was until after the resurrection. But we know how it ends. And so it should also be that glimmer of hope for us, that even in the darkest moments of our lives, even in the worst moments of our lives, to remember that we are saved in hope, as Paul says. Not the hope that can be seen, because Paul says, who hopes for what you can already see, what's already there? You don't need that. We hope for what is yet to be seen. We hope for what is expected. And Paul says we have that hope in patience. And sometimes the hope comes quickly. Sometimes it takes several days. And sometimes it seems like it might never come, like waiting for baseball season to begin in December. And yet it is still there. The promises of God is still there. The love of God is still there because God wins. That love wins. That darkness and despair are realities of our lives. That there is grief and pain and suffering. They are realities in our world. But as the psalmist tells us, while grief may last for the night, joy always comes in the morning. The light of Christ is that joy. And of course, resurrection is that hope. And so on this night, let us not jump to the end. Let us not jump to Easter and to the resurrection, thinking we will know exactly what will happen in that in-between. Instead, let us be present in this moment, waiting with patience and with the expectation of hope. With the expectation of joy, with the expectation of promises fulfilled. Because today is the day in which hope ever springs eternal. Not the hope of what is seen, but the hope that is yet to be fulfilled, resting in the assurance that we are saved in that hope. I pray that it will be so, my brothers and sisters. Amen. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow our YouTube channel and Twitter, and like us on Facebook if you haven't already. And remember that every action you take today could change someone's life. So make sure it's a good one and be an agent of love. God bless.